Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar on virtual reality safety training in the workplace, where we will cover topics including what virtual reality technology is, why VR and why now, how to determine traditional training opportunities for VR training, and who is doing it already. Just a reminder, please keep your mics muted and video off during this webinar. I'm Justin Cochran, Director of Marketing and New Business Development for Upstate Safety Services in Nichols, New York. With me today are Matt Gill, CEO of Enhance VR, located at the Kauffman Incubator in Binghamton, New York, and Melissa Schmitz, Emerging Technologies Research Engineer and VR Technical Lead for the Raymond Corporation in Green, New York. For those on the webinar who may be unfamiliar with one or more of our companies, here is some brief background on each. Upstate Safety Services was established in 2005 and provides businesses with innovative ways to improve their safety culture by offering world-class technical writing and documentation services, comprehensive workplace and electrical safety training and engineering services that enable businesses to save time, money, and lives. Enhance VR Incorporated was founded by Matt in 2017 while he was still in college with the intent of making virtual reality experiences that are more engaging or educational than existing gaming applications. From motion simulators to workforce development, Enhance VR has produced multiple VR systems and continues today to create unique training opportunities with their partners in the Southern Tier. The Raymond Corporation is a leading global provider of best-in-class material handling products and intelligent intralogistics solutions that optimize your entire operation, deliver actionable insights, and transform operations through automation. While today's talk is about VR in the workplace, the backgrounds of each of the speakers reside predominantly in manufacturing. This webinar will focus more on examples from that industry. However, VR can be applied in any industry, and if you are interested in discussing a specific application for a specific industry, please let us know after the webinar. A quick reminder that anyone who has any questions can post them into the chat. We will repeat each question we get from the chat aloud so that you do not need to adjust your microphones during the Q&A portion that follows. With that, I want to turn this over to Matt quickly to go over the different types of VR and AR technology before we get started. Matt?
Thanks, Justin. Hope everyone can hear me all right. Again, feel free at any time to just post in the chat. If you can't see the slides or you can't hear anybody, we'll make sure we pause and correct things as we can. So again, today's talk, we're working on virtual reality, and we just wanted to quickly cover for everyone the umbrella that virtual reality sits in. So overall, virtual reality, and what you might have also heard of augmented reality and mixed reality, sit under this larger umbrella we call XR, or extended reality, to kind of sum all these technologies together. And quickly here to kind of go across the span of how these technologies work and what applications they might be used in, we're going to go across from real life to completely computer generated. So augmented reality, which you might have seen before potentially with Pokemon Go, or in this case, the Google Glass, really just covers a lot of pop-up notifications on top of an existing real life. So it's really not very intrusive in the work or the world that you're living in. So the next bar up, though, is mixed reality, where you have a lot more overlay into the environment. And it is this example, like a whale coming out of a gym floor. Headsets like the Microsoft HoloLens, which is shown there, or potentially the Magic Leap, push the boundaries of being able to incorporate more visuals and more interactions in a mixed world into your real life. And on the far side, and what we're mainly going to talk about today, is virtual reality. The headset there is the Oculus Rift. And as you can see from the image, it's completely computer generated. So if there was no computer or no processes set up to that headset, it would be a completely black screen in front of you. And to emphasize with all of these, the intention is to try and blend as best as they can into a new reality, full immersion. So with virtual reality, you're going to be experiencing complete 360 degrees of visuals that truly immerse you into this new reality. And with different technologies for inputs, each one has their own unique way of allowing someone to control that reality. So we hope this is a good, quick overview for you to understand some of the different types. And again, today's discussion, we're mainly going to focus on virtual reality, but we're happy to bring up any of these others in the chat or the questions post the discussion. So back to you, Justin.
Thanks, Matt. So why would businesses want to use VR as a training program? It's no secret that many people learn best by doing. And on what you see here on the slide is Edgar Dale's pyramid of learning, which indicates that after 2 weeks, people tend to remember 90% of what they learn after simulating an experience. However, not everybody's wired to learn that way. Some people prefer to see things done, others can listen and utilize mental cues best. But when learners are actively learning as opposed to learning in a more passive setting, the results can be impressive. Enter VR training, where simulation can be applied across multiple types of learning styles, including visual, auditory, hands-on, and kinesthetically. Using VR as a training tool accomplishes a few things. First, the simulation of a real environment makes the reality of it easier to grasp. And most importantly, it can be grasped in a safe environment. Imagine you're working on a live electrical panel for the first time. The complexities and intricacies of the wiring, the switches, the circuits, they're all complicated enough for someone doing it for the first time. Add to that the inherent risk and danger to the mix, and now you have a new distraction, not to mention the pressure that you might be feeling inside and possibly externally to do it right and to do it fast, which we all know is not always a winning combination. All these ingredients can lead to a severe lack of situational awareness that could be costly or worse, deadly. Fortunately, VR training developers can cut large pieces of equipment down to comprehensible sizes, can carve out sections of complex systems to simulate where learning challenges occur most, and control the distractions that compete for an individual's cognitive load. This provides an environment that teaches the user more effectively and more safely than it would be on the real thing. So what issues would a VR-based training program address? So taking a look at OSHA's top 10 willful violations from 2019, which OSHA defines willful as one committed with intentional disregard or plain indifference to OSHA requirements, we see fall protection and fall protection training requirements on the list at number 1 and number 10 respectively. And if we take a look at OSHA's top 10 serious violations from 2019, OSHA defines serious violations as instances where there is a high probability that death or serious physical harm can occur and that the employer knew or should have known about. As you can see, fall protection comes in at number 1, and fall protection training requirements also appears again at number 9. So we see a trend here that's kind of troubling. So let's dive a bit deeper into number 9. The specific violation has appeared in OSHA's top 10 most cited violations for the past 3 years, and it touches industries ranging from construction to office support to courthouse staff, and people were cited a total of 1,955 times. The dollar amount for those penalties levied for that specific violation were just shy of $3 million. So what's missing? The hidden costs, such as legal bills and medical bills, which astronomically skyrocket the overall cost to a business. And remember, this is just fall protection for 2019. So think about other applications and industries that you're in that could have issues that could be mitigated if you had a better training program, such as VR, that can simulate doing something like fall protection training properly at a fraction of the cost that one could pay if people are not trained properly and something goes wrong across any industry. In the US, OSHA is very clear about what is required for a compliant fall protection training program. As illustrated in the prior slides, it remains a leading cause of many serious injuries and deaths across all types of industries. In addition, many misses and near misses resulting in minor injuries only are not always reported. So OSHA's fall protection training program is obviously one of the more complex compliance regulations that the agencies put into effect, and it does challenge employers of every kind to implement it effectively. The standard says employers need to provide training for people exposed to fall hazards, and employees have to be able to recognize those hazards and follow procedures designed to minimize the risks. Employers also need to make sure that employees are trained in the nature of fall hazards, procedures for looking at fall protection systems, arrest systems, among other things. So this leads to several opportunities for training improvements. So what could a fall protection program using VR look like? First of all, a key sign of an effective training program is that it happens frequently throughout the year in small doses to keep workers updated on new information, to reinforce standards to employees who don't seem to fully grasp or understand them. They address incidents and inadequacies in an affected employee's knowledge, and they keep best practices on workers' minds. In addition, a VR program for fall protection can help the employee identify hazards, understand how to select the proper PPE and equipment, and understand their limitations and understand fall clearances. So how then do employers mitigate the risk in the most effective manner using VR? In other words, why use VR now? First, when training can be done in an interactive environment, companies can revise or retool learning modules as needed to keep up with all different types of changes and best practices. And businesses are always trying to keep up with other changes and technological advancements. So by providing a VR training program, businesses can easily upload new simulations that can then be deployed across an entire organization. You can use the same trainers, but you use them more efficiently. That addresses any changes in the workplace that render prior training obsolete, which saves time, money, and a lot of legal risk and headache. Second, VR training programs, they can be portable, meaning anytime, anywhere. And what portability does is it reduces or eliminates the downtime required for scheduled classroom training at specific locations. And again, it can be quickly deployed anywhere in your organization, and personnel can practice sessions when they need to. Third, VR training can be tailored to help each learner master things at their own pace. They can track where mistakes most frequently occur. And what's nice about it is you can offer remedies within the training program to address any pain points with the comprehension of a particular task. New sets of pain points or issues can be loaded for other individuals to address their areas for improvement. And that would address a lot of the subparts within the larger OSHA fall protection training program standard that we're using for an example here. Fourth, you can save time with a VR training program, especially travel time and testing time. So while the time it takes to learn a specific topic might not change, using VR training to refresh employee skills does save the employer time and money, both financially and legally. Um, and it minimizes the risk of post-training mishaps in the field once training's done. An additional benefit is that it could reduce workers' comp insurance premiums as well. If you choose to go with a portable system, you could theoretically address the nature of some of the fall hazards in the work area safely right before performing the actual tasks. And last, using a fall protection as an example again, technical skills such as identifying the right type of harness are usually not an issue, but addressing behavioral skills, like inspecting a harness for damage or making sure that it's in the right condition and fits properly. Those can be addressed in a VR training program simply by having the user perform inspections and look for wear and other signs of damage before they actually move on to another step. So it's not just being able to see hazards and anchor points. An employee needs to be able to identify them and make sure others can as well. And it's not just an employee knowing that they need a harness. It's the employee selecting the right one and inspecting it properly. And it's not just someone understanding fall protection systems. It's being able to build the correct one for the task required that allows for successful arrest and, if needed, safe rescue. So VR puts trainees in places and situations that they are likely to encounter on the job and lets them experience how their actions affect outcomes. And again, this is all done in a safe environment. VR helps employees feel confident that they can perform tasks safely, and the realistic training experiences allow them to express curiosities, and that keeps them more connected. Learners also often find VR training more engaging and relevant than instructor-led training or e-learning courses. So in summary, what VR can do is help you reduce the cost of training workforces of all sizes. It enables you to provide hands-on experiences when realistic exercises aren't feasible. It allows you to deliver consistent training for each worker, regardless of location or trainer. And it ensures that you deliver more effective training because research suggests that simulated training, such as VR, increases knowledge retention, as you saw indicated in the pyramid of learning slide. So as a quick point before I hand things over to Matt, I'd like to say that we do find ourselves in a challenging era. A lot of us are working remotely, and the chances that some form of social distancing becomes the new norm seem more likely every day. To be fully transparent, I was skeptical about VR. I'm not a gamer at heart, so the technology never really resonated with me until we tried it for training. And I was blown away. And as we partnered with Enhanced VR to develop some demos, I became a believer. I became a believer that this technology could be a game changer. I wasn't sure when and I wasn't sure how until recent events. So I can't stress enough how fortunate we all are right now in these times to have access to a technology as innovative as virtual reality. It may be the one key tool businesses need to consider investing more thought and research and resources into in order to maintain business continuity while at the same time reducing health risks. And it absolutely 100% delivers results. So now I'd like to hand this off to Matt to explain exactly what VR technology is and key things that your organization can do with that technology. Matt?
Thanks, Justin. Really appreciate that. And yeah, just like Justin said, the technology, I mean, we're really fortunate to have something of this ability to be able to use now in this day and age, especially with everyone working remote. I mean, it just emphasizes the ability of what this technology can offer. So yeah, my name's Matt Gill. I'm the founder of Enhanced VR. We're based out of Binghamton, New York. I'm the lead developer for the company. And again, we primarily focus on virtual reality training content. And what I want to get into today, as much as I want to cover all the different headsets and technologies that are out there, I mean, I could speak for hours on it. What I really want to focus on is kind of clearing a path for our attendees on how you can go about designing a project or how you might go about implementing a different type of training or method at your organization within virtual reality. By doing so, I'm going to cover how the ways as a company we go about designing a project, giving you some of the key factors and steps you can use internally. And I'm going to be using what we just recently finished with Upstate Safety Services as an example. If you haven't had the opportunity yet before the presentation, please go to their YouTube channel and check out the videos so you can get a real good eye of what we're talking about in these discussions. So I'll lightly talk about some of the different technologies. We'll have some great examples of what the technologies can do with Melissa, but I really want to focus on the project development because there is quite a bit to navigate. I mean, even in this picture alone, the amount of headsets that are in that background are a small fraction of the amount of headsets that are actually out there on the market. So for anyone utilizing something that's for gaming that you put on your face and you put you into a completely new reality can be really overwhelming. There's lots of different styles, costs, and functions of these different headsets. You know, do you use it sitting down, standing up, walking around? And on top of that, how do you input into these headsets? We have multitude of different types of hand tracking, controllers, sensors, or cameras that you could use. Haptics like feedback of vibrations or actually physically feeling something when you're moving in the virtual environment. And on top of that, more companies are adding connected tools such as databases or logging information that might be critical to helping out your training program, but what is it that's really necessary? And at the end of the day, you're going to navigate creating this project, but where do you set up? What's your location? Is it mobile enough, like Justin mentioned? So there's quite a bit to be able to navigate. And my goal is to, cover as much as I can on how to make this a lot easier for you to consider utilizing virtual reality. And the first point of that would be some big key factors. You can really, even though it's a really high level, like 30,000 feet, you can really focus on the headset, the input, and the content as starting to skim away a lot of the technology problems that you might try to figure out when going into a project. Right off the bat with a headset, you want to think about how mobile do I want this system to be, or do I want it to be more stationary? Because we have a lot of headsets now that you can, as Justin mentioned, throw into a backpack or a carry-on and bring it to the location and be able to do training. versus using in a stationary location, you might be able to achieve more, because if the visuals that you're trying to compel in that content are going to be very simple, mobile still works pretty well, right? Because a lot of these headsets might be running off of processors that are the same in our cell phones. But if you want to have extremely complex visuals, very realistic experiences, maybe you might want to consider more of a stationary setup, such that you can control and monitor the amount of content that these people are seeing more readily. On top of that, the next figure to really think about is just the input. Almost every single headset out there comes with its own default style of controllers that typically work across platform. So it doesn't matter usually the content that you get, it usually works with those default controllers. So if you're experienced, you're thinking about doing simple pick up, put downs, pressing something, minor interactions that actually can still achieve a lot, you can just stick with the default controllers, and that really reduces a lot of the complexity into the design for the developers. But you could get more complicated, but it can make it a lot more interactive. So by utilizing hand tracking or camera systems or even bodysuits, you can achieve a lot more unique interactions that make the experience that much more fulfilling and memorable for the person that's doing it, which again, active brain, active mind drives a lot of great feedback. But again, input, just think, do I want very simple? Can I get through with that? Or do I need really a lot of complex interactions? And lastly, the content. Again, do you want to do training or do you want to do an exam? We'll get into this a little bit more in a minute here, but training is a lot more linear in the content that you're trying to provide. You have to do certain things in an order. Versus exams, there's a lot of room for error that takes a lot of time to develop in, and sometimes too much room for error can be too hard for the headset to actually generate those kind of environments. On top of that, potentially the connectivity. Do you want this connected to a database or some type of cloud system? So by understanding how connected you want this to be can really reduce the amount of headsets and technologies that you might want to use, to the point where you're just using a very simple device off the shelf that can achieve quite a lot without having to have too much of a monetary investment on getting a lot of accessory inputs. So in the case example here with Upstate Safety Services, we built two experiences for them. We did a lockout tagout training experience where you worked on the background image there, where you had to shut down, lock out, and test with a virtual reality system to be able to use a virtual voltmeter and checking on a control panel, which running at a high voltage is a very high risk situation. And we also did a fire training experience of being able to do the OSHA path method while in an office. So again, two very, very important contents to cover for training in any type of business. And so to go about these processes, we covered 4 key steps, which we acronymed EVER, that can help navigate what kind of content you need to develop and how do you go about that. So those acronyms stand for, expanding the opportunities, eliminating 80% of your project, visualizing your steps, and the report and review. And each one of these uniquely are very important to developing a virtual reality training project. And with balance between this and the key factors I mentioned before, can really ease a lot of the load on figuring out what do you want to do in a virtual training experience. So off the bat, with expanding your opportunities, I encourage you to get out of your traditional thought process. Most typically, when we're talking about this new reality technology, people forget that you don't need to be in a classroom, you don't need to be in a lecture, and you don't need to necessarily be at the location. Really go down the rabbit hole. And sometimes I like to encourage, think about having a military contract level, monetary investment where you have a lot of money to be able to achieve something really interactive. So think about what makes your training unique. What is it that you really want to get out of it in the end, and that there's no limitations. So ignoring the technology. I know I mentioned that there's a lot of complexities, but just kind of let your mind wander. If you get too caught up in what it can and can't do, you're going to freeze on a multitude of different points. And so when we were talking with Upstate Safety Services, we jumped right into about 10 to 12 different potential content that we could build in virtual reality. But ultimately, we ended up eliminating like 80% of these. Not that we don't intend to do them on the future, but we just wanted to overall reduce the scope and complexity of the project. Any project should be doing this right to reduce the complexity, the monetary investment it might take. And again, usually getting into virtual reality here for the first time, you don't want to go all in. You might want to just do a simple prototype that can test a key point in that. So by going all the way down the rabbit hole allows you and the developer that you might be working with to get a full grasp of what you really want to test. And then the developer and you should be able to work your way back and figure out, what are you allowed to do in virtual reality? What might be cost savings to do it this way or another way? Make sure you're covering, certifications or time logging or equipment availability. Because there might be some things that you can legally not do in virtual reality or online or digitally than in real life. OSHA does have some regulations you have to keep track of. And then definitely identify common traits between lessons. Some things might seem very complex at first, but you can reduce a lot of that complexity if, say, you want to do work on 100 different types of vehicles, but there's really not a lot of unique differences between all those different vehicles. So you can use a templated, reproduction of the same vehicle in the virtual environment and just change subtle things at runtime instead of spending a lot of time to make each vehicle very unique. So again, the goal in this stage is to go 80-20. So go down the rabbit hole first, come up with a lot of ideas, and then kind of get your 80-20 going and rein yourself back in to start thinking about how would I really prototype this project. The next one, and extremely important, is visualizing your steps. The classic, example is, how would you make a PB&J sandwich? In any good game, simple tasks might not be that simple. Again, we're making essentially video games is what this type of experience is. And something that might be as simple as making a PB&J sandwich might be trivial because we can do it in seconds, can take a long time sometimes in programming, because depending on the amount of steps you want to track, such as I want to make sure they open up the pantry door and that it's completely open, and then they're reaching in and grabbing the correct jar of peanut butter and then checking that the expiration date is correct. And if it's correct, then you can go back to the kitchen station, open up that jar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So some things that are very simple can get very complicated. So make sure you make that very transparent on what you want to cover. In this case, the two easy examples are identifying, do you want to do training or do you want to do examination? Training is very linear, like I mentioned before. You can't do tasks really out of order. It's a habit forming stage. So this way we can really quickly reduce the amount of extra room for errors that might be out there, and allow the person to easily move through the experience. And development wise, it can be easier depending on what the experience is. An examination, it's more like a tree, right? You're starting at the root of it and you're working your way up through the branches, because there could be a lot of room for error. It can be very free to roam, what's right or wrong. And that can be a little bit more difficult to program depending on what you're trying to cover, especially if there's multitudes of different things you want that person to openly make mistakes on so that they can correct those later on. So just make sure you start identifying what type you want to do, so that you can make that more transparent when you're writing up the design docs on what you want to do. But don't be discouraged. I mean, again, there's templated programming. There's a lot of things that we can do as developers to ease that burden so that both of these are quite easy to accomplish and not, extremely costly to the business. Our goal is to help you get better training. That's our goal is at Enhance VR, not to make something so expensive that, people aren't getting trained properly because they don't have access to it. So with this step, when we were working with Upstate, what actually worked great for us was they just sent us a video. They took the exact paperwork that they needed to cover. They sent that along to us, and they did about a 10-minute video of the lockout training that they were going to do. And they were explaining every single step that they were doing. And that's where we got a really good feel on what we needed to do, and allowed us to ask questions, because we noticed that they were either standing in certain spots or picking certain things up that maybe they didn't mention. And we said, is that something that's important to you? So maybe just recording with your trainer or your HR department on that process can be a great way to quickly identify what you want to do. And lastly, and this is very important, is report and review. What is the experience's overall goal? I highly recommend you need to get out of thinking of this as being a very flashy technology. While it's cool, like many technologies before it, the flashiness fades off and people just don't want to use it if it's just that's the only factor, the cool factor. By you identifying some specific areas of improvement within your company and making that content engaging, it's going to last a long time and be a worthwhile investment, especially if you know that through this experiment, by utilizing virtual reality, you can improve the retention rate of your employees, which is a no-brainer. That does happen with virtual reality. The industry trend is incredible. You want to improve your training attendance, improve your safety numbers, onboarding, or even company morale. Really make sure you identify some factors that's going to make you feel confident in the decision after you get through your first virtual experience, that you know that that experience is working. So again, create a comparable test with traditional training. That might help as well. Maybe a paper exam at the end that you both still do. And I really encourage you to get other staff involved for the testing and also the designing of this experience. It shouldn't be something that's just left up to management or a specific department to be able to develop. We were talking to one group that had the potential of using this content that they're building in line with their actual staff. So their staff could provide feedback on how they assemble certain parts, because there might be a hidden gem that could save the company, minutes, hours, or, and lots of money and time if the employee is part of this process of designing a new assembly protocol for onboarding. And then also get other groups involved. If you find that you're a little nervous as a company that you want to do this all by yourself, try to get other companies that maybe do the same work that you do. Maybe not necessarily your competitors, but other clients or other companies that might have the same skill sets of employees you're looking for, and work together. We are a community here, and I'm proud to say in the Southern Tier, I think we really like to work together to have a community success instead of individual success. So, being able to work together with other companies and cover that burden of maybe building out a virtual training content might be a lot more accessible to everyone because of that. So again, it's a balancing act, right? I mean, there's a lot to determine, but if you can identify those three key factors of, reducing the project because of, what kind of headset input or content you want to use, given those, couple reviewing factors, and then going through those steps that I just mentioned can really help you identify a really solid, 5 to 20 minute, prototype that can cover quite a bit of training and hopefully prove to you that virtual reality is a very good substitute for training. And again, avoid the flashiness. I really want to emphasize that because there's been plenty of times that has come up quite a bit. And then you can really grow and expand from there. And I wanted to mention, who else is really utilizing virtual reality now, because what we covered can really be a great example of covering a quick, simple, experience that you can use to determine where you want to grow with this training in your company. But companies like Ford utilize virtual reality training for the design of some of their new vehicles. DHL uses it for training new people inside of warehouses for quicker, packaging times. UPS does some of the same. Walmart has had phenomenal success by utilizing 17,000 virtual reality headsets to reduce some of their training from 8 hours to 15 minutes. Big improvement factor there. Johnson & Johnson is now utilizing a lot of virtual reality, as well as Boeing. And one, before I hand it off to her, I really want to emphasize that has done an amazing job, is local. And some of you might have heard about them, is Raymond with their virtual reality fork truck simulation system. So with that, I wanted to hand it over to Melissa to talk more about their system and their experience and successes they've had with using virtual reality in training.
Thank you, Matt. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Schmitz, and I work for the Raymond Corporation as Emerging Technologies Engineer and Tech Lead for Virtual Reality. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with us, Raymond's headquarters is local to Greene, New York, but we are also a part of the larger Toyota family of companies under Toyota Materially Handling North America. As for what we do, for the last 100 years or so, Raymond has been making all sorts of shapes and sizes of forklift trucks to perform various types of jobs in a warehouse, with more unique ones being innovated each day to meet e-commerce demands. However, in the last 20 years or so, we've been shifting our focus to creating new technologies for the 21st century, whether it's warehouse analytics, automated vehicles, innovative energy systems, or what I work on, which is virtual reality. With Raymond VR, you can take a forklift truck directly off your fleet, plug it in with our patent-pending simulation port technology, and drive a truck in VR lessons while standing on a real vehicle using real controls. We're proud to say that our VR simulator has won several awards, such as being named one of Fast Company's top 10 most innovative companies for AR and VR, for innovative technology that goes beyond basic immersion, among other industry-specific awards as well. So this goes to demonstrate just how disruptive emerging technologies could be for your business if you choose to pursue them, especially in industries where people would not expect to see VR, such as with forklift trucks. And so there are two key cornerstones that enable this technology. The first is our patent-pending simulation port, or S-port for short. With this cable, we can plug into the vehicle manager of a real truck to capture signals from the vehicle's control handles while blocking any movement from occurring in the real vehicle through multiple redundancies in hardware and software blocks. So while operators are standing on a real vehicle, they are actually driving it in virtual reality. The second here is hand tracking, which is enabled by the Leap Motion camera. We didn't want operators to learn using controllers because they just don't adequately match the feel of real handles. The button mapping just is not similar at all. And so for the fast-paced environment of driving a vehicle, we wanted to pursue hand tracking while using real control handles through the S-Port for a more natural experience. When an operator puts on the VR headset, the first thing we tell them to do is look at your hands, because seeing their hands helps them feel more confident with their movements and provide a more immersive feel. So our operators tend to report that it actually does feel like they're driving a real truck. We offer a variety of structured lessons for every single truck, ranging from the basics of how to use the controls to moving pallets, which are standard to most traditional forklift training. However, the major difference that VR makes here is the ability to give real-time feedback and to test emergency scenarios, which would otherwise be more difficult to test on a real truck, such as pedestrian awareness, boxes falling from the shelves, or maybe a tractor trailer driving off while you're trying to load it. This allows us to train not just technical skills, but the behavioral skills that Justin mentioned earlier, which form everyday habits. In VR, we require, for example, that at the end of every aisle, you must come to a complete stop, honk, look left and right, and if it applies to your facility, look at the overhead mirror. All of that before you can proceed into the intersection. Anytime you fail to do any one of those things, you will immediately get a penalty message. Not only will this drop your overall score, but it will give you constant reminders of what behavior is expected when you're driving a forklift truck. That real-time feedback is much more difficult to achieve in real training if you have to shout across the aisle of a noisy warehouse, for example. Plus, it's standardized to where every error is caught and penalized, which becomes super helpful once they start driving on the real truck. Plus, because these are standardized lessons, every learning session is taught in exactly the same way for every operator for consistency across all of the lessons. And to come back to a point that Matt made a bit earlier as well, since this is a software product, you can easily templatize components of a warehouse or entire lessons. So over the 13 trucks that we offer, we do have a total of 300 lessons, but a certain number of the initial lessons that you get introduced to the forklift and warehouse environments are nearly the same for every truck. So being strategic about the content that you can reuse will help you save on project costs. Now, I also want to point out that these lessons require driving a long distance across a warehouse. So another great benefit of VR is that in as little as a 6 foot by 6 foot space, you can access an entire warehouse to train in. So instead of taking up critical space that could interfere with normal operations in your warehouse, you could park a truck in a corner, hook up the VR system, and have an entire virtual warehouse at your disposal. This small footprint was incredibly important for one of our customers, Ginsberg Foods. Operating 24 hours, 6 days a week, there was always too much going on in their warehouse to allow for proper training at the same time as daily operations. And so they wanted to see more consistency in the company's program as well. So in using the Raymond VR simulator, they could help operators become more familiar and proficient with forklift controls in a virtual warehouse environment that would not interfere with daily operations. This improved the overall productivity of the entire warehouse and allowed operators both seasoned and brand new become more consistent in their driving habits. Additionally, they found that the VR system helped them retain new talent, as many of their new hires are millennials who expressed an interest in VR because they're already familiar with the technology and found it to be a unique way to learn more efficiently. So another indirect benefit of utilizing new technologies such as VR is that you can enhance your organization's ethos as a technology-forward company. Historically, Raymond manufactures forklifts, but now we are also a warehouse technology company because of the new tech products we offer our customers. And if you'd like to see the full case study from Ginsberg Foods, you can also find that on the VR page of our website. So I hope this case study of our product helped you see some of the benefits our customers have seen by using our VR teaching product as part of a more comprehensive overall training program, as well as how VR might be able to impact your own industry. If you're interested in getting a taste of what our VR is like, we have a 360 YouTube video that can be accessed from any device. So if you happen to have a VR headset that you can jump into the environment yourself right through YouTube VR, but it also works pretty well on YouTube mobile and desktop. So be sure to check that out either from the link on the slide or by searching Raymond VR Simulator on YouTube. If you'd like to see more from me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and follow my updates on Medium, where my most recent article was on precautions you can take to protect both your eyes and your productivity if you are a professional in the VR space, among many more. And thank you for having me.
All right, thanks so much, Melissa. That's excellent information. So what I'd like to do now is go ahead and open this time for some Q&A. As some of you have already been doing, you can submit any questions that you may have through the chat feature, and we will read questions back and provide as much color to them as we can. Go ahead, Matt.
So we I'll kind of moderate some of the questions here. We'll go a little bit longer with this meeting here just so we can answer as many questions as we can. And please, as you put them into the chat, if there's any questions we don't get to, you don't feel like we answered well enough, just put a comment in the chat and we'll send out an email to everyone afterwards with their answers. So a couple answers were already starting to be thrown out there for some of these questions. Our first one here was, how does this system integrate into corporate learning management system? From Rose. So it depends on the type of interactions you want to do. So, I mean, if you want to integrate it into something that's maybe already pre-existing, it just depends on, I would say, the level of data that you want to get out of that type of experience. Especially if you already have like a prefabricated training program that you might have, it can be pretty easy to just template the information that you already created and utilize this as kind of like a pass-fail system to speed that up. Does anyone else, Justin or Melissa, do you have a comment on that question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, employers, they have a responsibility to provide training to staff that goes beyond their day-to-day job. So if you think, you know, in my prior job, I was on kind of responsible for getting people out for fire drills, health and safety things. So VR would bring a new dimension to what's normally like dull, repetitive types of training. And in other training cases, usually, you know, with a learning management system, there's usually some type of test at the end that, you know, tests on a learner's capabilities at the end. And just because you pass it with 100 doesn't mean that you can go right out and actually apply it to what you're doing. With VR, trainers can actually use a learning management system to observe trainees in real time, and they're able to have some visual insight and perform tasks for themselves.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So the next question we have here was from Tom was mentioning, you know, the idea of being able to put this into some kind of like moving system. So you could have, you know, pretty much one of those traveling STEM rooms that we've seen before. I think that's what you're trying to describe. Like, I think that's an excellent idea. I've seen it in different applications, how some groups have done that. Usually when the companies are large enough, they might end up just having their own training area built into the company's facility that this can be integrated into. But I do like the idea of being able to shift that around. I've seen it before, and I think that's depending on how deep maybe a community wants to get into a project, I think that's a great opportunity to pursue. Cliff's question was, you know, usually cutting leading edge technology like this moves faster than, you know, regular standard or, you know, it's modified. Are there any industries that are doing better or worse to keeping up with VR, AR, MR based training? I know from just saying that Walmart example, for improvements because of the technology, I've seen a lot in material handling has seen a very big improvement in helping that, especially when you look at some of the Walmart training, whether it be identifying shelves that need to be restocked or shipments that need to go out. That has been very pivotal for these crunch time operations. And there are some that I think that could be potentially falling behind. Businesses that might have a lot of lost time or high risk situations that aren't taking advantage of something that can simulate extremely risky situations rapidly. This could be extremely pivotal too. Does anyone else have comments on that?
I would add that an industry that isn't as, I guess, locked down from regulations on that is education. So there's been a lot of advancements, especially in medical education, which is super relevant for right now. But just because you're not teaching someone something towards something that's safety related most of these times, it's a great way to make education a lot more interactive. So for example, for anatomy and physiology, you can use VR and like go in and like grab a heart out of the body and open it up and see what's inside. So it's a great learning opportunity that's not as hindered by regulations.
Thanks, Melissa. Hope that answers your question there, Cliff. Tom asked, have there been any requests yet for proper PPE and social distancing training in lieu of the coronavirus situation? There has been some discussions out there. I've actually, unfortunately, seen more video games to combat the virus than I have seen training, but a lot of different groups are starting to make, handheld apps just for your phone. But I think this would be an amazing, opportunity for virtual reality to really jump forward and training people on what are some of the proper things to be able to do, especially like Melissa was saying in the medical field. I think there's a lot of room for improvement that this technology could really help with. If it's something that's definitely interested in you or specific items with anyone of pursuing specific industries or questions, send them along. We'd love to hear where you think this can make an impact in. Tom asks, but why wait until the testing stage to be able to integrate some of these things? Because you have the opportunity to try it out. So there are a lot of different things that you can go out there and try now. I highly recommend reaching out to any organizations that you might know in your network that might be utilizing virtual reality to use a demo. But I think waiting until the testing stage, because a lot of different businesses are unique and there's a lot of different unique skills that you want to develop out of these trainings. While a lot of companies might have some similar topics I think that they want to cover, there are certain parts of it that the company wants to improve on internally. Maybe one company might differ in lead lag times of assembly versus others. So that VR experience might not be truly motivational for that company to dive into it. So I think it'd be great to get exposed as soon as you can to just trying out virtual reality, but usually being able to do a first step prototype of testing something important with your company can really help you get right into it. We hope most people, are forward thinking and that when they see this technology, they really want to take advantage of it. Does anyone else have a thought on that? Okay. Well, Joe answered the answer for Melissa. So yeah, the training for the VR training that Melissa mentioned was, I said lessons take about 30 seconds to 5 minutes, and there's 10 to 26 lessons depending on their types of trucks. That's really awesome.
Yeah, and to add to that, something that's 30 seconds might be the initial lesson where you drive forward and drive backward just to get you started. And then something that could be more complicated, 5 minutes, might be picking up a pallet, putting it into a certain type of rack, getting out of the rack safely, going around the warehouse. It could be more complex, like having to load a tractor trailer. So there are a lot of different types of lessons that you could possibly do. So depending on how complex the specific skill you're trying to build is, it just depends on how long the lesson is.
Thanks. Yeah, awesome answer. Ron asks, any issues wearing glasses with the headsets? It comes and goes. There's a lot of headsets now have a type of like add-in that you can put into the headset that can help space it a little further away from your face to get your glasses in. If you have more minimalist glasses that don't really go far outside like the range of your temples or the sides of your head, you can typically wear glasses with them, but it's strongly encouraged if you do need to wear glasses to have a contact alternative to wear, because the headsets do try to, make the visuals perceive that it's the correct visual distance. So if you do have an issue with distance or close up and you do need to wear glasses, it is recommended you try to have that person have contacts. Or again, what's actually kind of nice with a lot of this virtual training is that it can still be displayed on a standard 2D screen. So if you need the person to still kind of experience it, make sure you mention that with your developers if you're thinking about doing a project, so that's an alternative for you. Anyone else have a comment on that? I know that's a pretty common one that always comes up.
You got her.
Let's see. Cliff, any thoughts on micro-credential certifications based on a VR platform, maybe work with BOCES or community college? I think that's excellent. For people who don't know BOCES, it's an amazing state program to get students more technical skills while they're in high school. I think it's predominantly a New York State thing. Cliff, I think micro-credentials are huge. I think it's a huge transition that we're seeing regardless anyways in training and how we're learning, and trying to get people more stats as soon as we can. It's been an interest of our company to be able to incorporate as many micro-credentials or certifications into our training so that it gives that much more meaning to the training. And I think it would give that much more meaning to potential clients or employers that when someone's going through training, they're not just sitting through another day of training. They're getting something racked up that can stick with them and stay with them where they go. And that is a huge company morale booster. So I think that's really important.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
Ron's got a question about whether or not OSHA's weighed in on this technology for use in their required trainings. So OSHA has not explicitly weighed in if VR is acceptable or not. It does appear to them as a training tool, and training content is the most important.
Melissa, I think, do you have a couple thoughts on it just from your experience a little bit?
Yeah, so the way that we use VR is as I mentioned, like as part of a more comprehensive training process. So people do still start out watching safety videos to get introduced to the concepts. Then they'll spend some time in VR doing the standardized lessons to get used to how to drive a forklift truck. And as you said, some of the behavioral skills that we want them to learn. And then from there, they will complete certification by actually going through the normal certification on a forklift truck. And so the idea here is not to replace any type of OSHA certification. It's to teach the skills that you would want them to have once they actually get on the real truck and then complete that certification.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I think that's great. And I know we kind of touched on it a little bit. It can really come down to the partners that you might be working with or just your own company resources, just to make sure you identify what may or may not be an equivalent substitute. While we've been predominantly talking about manufacturing and OSHA, I'm aware of certain medical practices that the certifying bodies are a little bit more lenient on the types of technologies you can use. So, it would be a good discussion to have with either regional coordinators for, OSHA or certifiable bodies to ask, is this a substitute? Or, you mentioned you can do digital training. What might be an acceptable alternative is if some training opportunities can be done online, then that might lead to potentials of being able to do it in virtual as well. So there's a lot to keep in mind. And I know Upstate and is very helpful to navigate any of those things if you have questions about that.
Yeah, and I would say that the use of VR doesn't necessarily have to be to get the official certification when you're using it for that purpose. It has a separate purpose from the training certification in certain use cases. So for us, we emphasize being able to learn the skills that you need to know before you get on the truck, and then the truck training becomes more of the actual exam. Whereas the VR is just getting you used to and getting you comfortable with how to drive the truck and the behavioral aspects of it. So it depends on your specific use case and whether or not there are OSHA regulations for it. But, depending on your situation, it could stand in for certified training. It just depends on your industry and the regulations that it has.
Yeah, thanks for Melissa. I think that's great. That behavioral, I think we really wanted to hit a lot in this presentation, that there's a lot of behavioral skills that can drastically, really improve the level of training and competency of your organization and in your staff, because there's a lot of skill sets that, yes, some are technical that you do need to know, but a lot of them are just habit-based skills that just either take someone a while to learn, or it's takes a while for them to improve or, correct within themselves. So VR is just an awesome alternative to that, and allows someone to feel comfortable with learning those skill sets. But great question. Definitely a good one for discussion. Paula asks, any development of VR to training with an app as well? If you're still in the chat, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit more, the best interpretation, if anyone else wants to pipe in on this, my guess is if you want to use VR training with like a digital application, I think that's definitely possible. It will definitely be a little Inception-like, being in a computer to work on a computer, which would be pretty interesting. Okay, thank you. Digital, yes. Yeah, so I think it's definitely possible. I guess it depends on the level of interaction. If there's some things in the app that you think could just be reduced down to, kind of like a video game where you're training, just at the computer, and like the app itself won't cause any marks on you, I think that's possible. But there's a lot of extra features that you might have to coordinate inside of that. I think you could definitely do something in virtual reality. I have seen it for like blueprint reading or using like a tablet. as part of like a manufacturing process to bring out your tablet and to assess what parts you might need or identify the right print to and where to put it. That has been a big kind of opportunity for digital integration inside of a virtual experience. Anyone else
I
have
saw
some
another
thoughts on that?
question. I saw another question on there from Roseanne. She asked, how do you handle longer training? And so what we like to do, or at least recommend our customers do, is that anytime they exceed about 30 minutes or so, if you have multiple people that you're training at the same time, you just kind of rotate through people. So person number one will go through lessons maybe 1 through 5, and everyone will be watching them doing that. And then the person 2 will come up after 30 minutes, and then they'll do lesson 1 through 5, something along those lines, so that everyone gets a chance to see what they're supposed to be doing, and then they get their time in the simulator without being in there for too long, because the various headset manufacturers do recommend that you try and take a break after a certain period of time, like roughly 15 to 20 minutes or so. You should take a break, because this technology is new, and so we don't have in the industry, we don't know the exact I guess effects of using VR for like hours on end, but we would guess that it would be pretty similar to if you stare at a computer all day at work. And so if you want to reduce eye strain and things like that, you don't want to use it for too long in a row. So it's important to take breaks, and you can save time by just switching out operators in a training like we do. So.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, that was great. Well, that kind of covers most of our questions. We can hang around for another minute if anyone's got a quick one they want to. We had Cliff just jumped one in. Cost difference between creating a VR experience versus AR, MR, cost difference in the headsets. I knew someone was going to say cost eventually. So Cliff, thanks for bringing that up. So quickly here, creating a VR experience versus AR and MR. It's hard to say a varying, but it kind of depends on the group that you're working with, and the level of interaction you want to do. If you're trying to do MR or AR, you're going to get to a lot of templated stuff where you're just putting drop arrows or points to interact with or to do a certain process. So that can really reduce a lot of the cost and make it a lot more simple. I think the only overhead that can make it costly is something unique, maybe machinery that you have to keep track of. Virtual reality can tend to cost just a little bit more, just because you're sometimes making a completely, a full model of interactivity that you're going to be doing in that experience. So AR, VR, or AR and MR might be an alternative if you have excess machines around, or you're trying to do more real-time training and you're okay with that. VR is great for full simulation and trying to reduce all risks. An awesome transition is, learning in VR and then giving them an AR, MR headset to continue their work, such that, I know in today's day and age, we're reducing the amount of a single skill someone might have, and a shop person might have to know how to skillfully use 5 or 6 other machines that are pretty high tech on a shop floor. It would be great to learn in VR and then have the AR, MR as an assist while you're still continuing to learn those. And then Russ coughed with the difference in headsets. Typically the consumer ones that you might see that are out there today, if you're using just an off the shelf, it can range from about $300 to about $500 for the headset alone. I know at bulk order that cost can probably drop. There are some devices out there that can cost up to $5,000 to $6,000 for extremely high fidelity, but I don't know many enterprises other than major corporations, maybe like Ford, or that use them for like design purposes. But if anyone else wants to chime in on that, I think that's really about the standard cost and the difference in on some of those.
Yeah, I would say if you're doing a simpler VR setup that doesn't require major computing power, which is something you'll obviously have to discuss with whatever developer you're working with, that would require pretty much just the headset itself, in addition to the development costs, which would be around like $300 to $500, something around those lines. If you do need a full setup with the desktop PC, the gaming PCs with the specs that they require usually go for around for the PC itself, like $1,000 to $3,000, depending on how detailed you need the graphics to be. And some of it really depends on which ones you get. Desktop headsets itself could be from $500 to, as Matt said, like $5,000. So it really depends on where you're going to go for the specifics of your project, because Volvo uses this really special headset that's like $10,000 that is like a mixed reality headset in VR. And so, you know, it can get expensive if you want it to become really complex, but depending on the specific application you want to use, it could be pretty affordable. So like the Walmart one that Matt mentioned earlier, they use the Oculus Go, which I think is about $300. And you know, that's pretty affordable and scalable. So it depends on the type of experience you want. And so scalability is another thing you want to think about when you're looking into these experiences. If it is something that's part of a larger company, you can reduce the complexity of your project to make it more scalable if you need to as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Melissa. I think that's really important. Sorry, I forgot about the PC part. That's very important. Yeah, that's definitely the cost. Those are great estimates, I think, for about the cost. The one thing I just wanted to add just onto that was, just like you're saying with the scalability, you know, try to just, you know, balance and figure out how many people you plan to put through this, because if the lesson can take something that normally would be 8 hours traditionally, and maybe you can reduce it to an hour in virtual reality of log time, you know, you won't need to have, you know, 10 different headsets in a room running at the same time. You might be able to just have a single station and be able to just put more people through that much faster and still have the same amount of results. So again, it's a big balancing game. Yeah, I think that's really about it for all of our questions. I'm not seeing any more, and we're just a little bit over time now, so I think we'll wrap it up. Justin, any final thoughts on this?
Just want to thank everybody for attending. To let everybody know that a brief survey will be sent to each person that did attend. We do plan on having future webinars on VR and safety training. So if anybody has a topic that they want to discuss, please reach out to myself or Matt, and we can definitely get something arranged. In addition, I believe, Matt, a recording of the webinar is going to be available.
Yep. We do have this recorded. We'd like to be able to throw it up on, you know, YouTube or something. So anyone that wants to play back and see it, we'll also have the presentation available for people as well.
Okay, good. And I also wanted to encourage everyone to, again, head over to the Upstate Safety Services YouTube page and check out the VR training demos that we do have on fire extinguisher training and lockout tagout. I did include the links in the chat. I will also include those in an email later on. So in closing, we hope that you guys got something out of this webinar that you can take back with you and think about in terms of VR capabilities and how VR-based safety training and other VR-based programs can be applied within your organization, no matter what industry you're working in. Again, if you want to discuss things further, you can contact us at any time. On behalf of Matt from Enhanced VR and Melissa from the Raymond Corporation, we all wish you and your colleagues and loved ones the best during these challenging times. Thank you, and we will disconnect.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.